Anna. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you've seen my videos before, you may have seen me from this video, which is one of my best performing videos. I know it's not as many views as obviously a lot of videos on YouTube, but I'm still proud of it. Beyond series I'm intimidated to read, there are also just standalone books I'm intimidated to read, so I wanted to talk about those. However, I do have some caveats to the standalone rule that I'm going to talk about later in the video. But let's start with the true standalones that I am intimidated to read. Starting with Staying Fat for Sarah Burns. This was a book I remember loving when I was a kid. I am nervous to reread this because I am worried that because this book was obviously written during a time where not everyone was as accepting as they are today, where there wasn't a push for more inclusivity and whatnot, that this is going to give me the same vibes as An Abundance of Catherine's did, where if you haven't watched my video where I give other book recommendations to books I don't like, go ahead and watch that to see why it's not my favorite. But I really don't want this book to be ruined, and I think that's my general feeling with rereading books is because I was a literal child when I was reading these. I feel like I might not have caught on to some of the problematic language, tropes, whatnot that I'm more aware of today as an adult. This was written in 1993, which is 2 years before I was born. And I feel like the world in terms of what is in books, what is acceptable in books has changed so much since then. So I am really nervous that this is going to be problematic, and I feel like something that was so positive in my childhood is going to change. And of course I want to change to be a better reader, a more positive influence, but it also is, grieving a book that I literally read this like multiple times in a year. It meant so much to me. Fortunately, I don't remember many of the details, so I want to reread it, and I'm just scared that it's going to be a book that I am probably not going to pick up again. Now, going along the same vein of older books. Staying Fat for Sarah Burns I had read. I also have a lot of throwback books like this one, Sweethearts, where they were written a while ago. Sweethearts was written in 2008, so definitely different years than Staying Fat for Sarah Burns, but still older enough to where I feel like the push for that inclusivity, not as problematic language in books and everything, I feel like that push wasn't really big until the pandemic. I feel like any book that I read before the year 2020, I find something that makes me cringe a little bit, which I know probably isn't true, and I need to diversify my books. But when I find these throwback books and I remember these iconic covers that I always wanted to read when I was a kid, but I was more into the fantasy world, not so much into the contemporary stories. I see them now, I want to pick them up and read them, but I am nervous that I'm going to be reading a book that is problematic and I didn't do my research enough, or because places like BookTube, BookTok weren't as big, that these issues weren't as talked about. For example, I feel like one of the main reasons that the R word in John Green's books has been talked about is because they have more recent movies and shows made about them. I don't know what's in this book. I don't know if I do the research. There might not be anything that's talking about anything problematic in some of these throwback books like Sweethearts. It makes me a little nervous to read them, but I feel like this is where I need to practice my do not finishing skills, where if I see something problematic in one of these throwback books, I just have to put it down and stop reading it. I haven't DNF'd a book yet this year, so I feel like that's something I could really practice when reading these throwback books. I feel like The Girl with the Louding Voice is a good example for book talk books I'm intimidated to read. I feel like I saw this all over Book Talk, picked it up, but now I'm nervous to read it because I've read some Book Talk standalone books, for example, like Alone with You and The Ether, where I really didn't like it. And I really want to like The Girl with the Louding Voice because I've heard the story is so impactful. However, I'm somebody that's learning that I don't really like character-driven stories. I'm not the best with higher prose or a higher level writing style. So I'm not sure how this book is written. I'm also not the biggest fan of reading poetry or verse. I am just nervous to read this book, mainly because I don't know a lot about it, but I've seen it a lot on Book Talk. So I guess I'm intimidated to read popular Book Talk books that go along with this. And I really, really want to like this book. I keep putting it on my stacks to do for readathons, but I never get to it. I think because I am scared. And I think one of the things that'll help me get over books like this, where I don't think there's inherently anything problematic about them, but I'm just intimidated to read them, is doing this as part of my 365 Days of Books series, where I make a little shorts video going into what the book is about if I think I'll like it. So I think any book talk books I'm intimidated about, I want to add to that 365 Days series to make myself more comfortable about reading this. But yeah, sometimes I'm just scared I'm not going to like a book that so many people like. And that is pretty intimidating to me. So then I have a stack of 3 books that I feel like I'm intimidated to read for the same reason. And it was these types of books that actually inspired this video. So these are 3 books. They are standalone fantasy books. That scares me so much because I don't know how they fit all of the world building, all of the action and whatnot into these like smaller books. So let's start with Damsel. As a caveat, I have done all of these books for my 365 day series, so I've already done the research. I'm still intimidated to read them because I just don't know. This sounds so silly. I don't know how you have standalone fantasy books. Like, how is not every fantasy idea a duology? I just haven't introduced myself to that, and I'm worried I'm not gonna like it or not feel as fulfilled reading these. So with the Damsel, we have the new selected heir to the throne, whoever's becoming king, has to go and rescue a damsel from the clutches of a dragon. So it's following the perspective of the damsel. How am I gonna know all about the world? How am I gonna learn all about the prince? How am I gonna learn all about the lore in this short of a book? It just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm a little nervous to start it. Night of the Raven, Dawn of the Dove. And the thing is, all these books sound good when I'm thinking about them again. We have Katyani as she is becoming one of the best soldiers in this guard, and she is specifically assigned to guard the prince at a boarding school, and all of this turmoil happens. I know I said that summary in a sentence. I haven't read the book. Like, how are we gonna fit everything in here? Learning about the school, learning about Katyani's background, learning about the relationship she develops with the prince, and then also having it wrap up nicely in this many pages? How do they do that? So I have no idea. And I'm like a huge fantasy reader, but of series, so I'm just like, I'm nervous I'm not gonna like standalone fantasies. Last, we have an Enchantment of Ravens, which I know this is a standalone because I have done the research where the author's like, nope, there's not a sequel. The fact that people are asking if there's a sequel makes me think that this ending is not going to be very clean. And that makes me nervous to read this book because I usually like my books wrapped up with a nice little bow. So in the Enchantment of Ravens, we follow Isabel. She's an artist who typically works for more like criminals, but she gets a commission from a royal person and that commission goes terribly. So then she's put on trial, and then during the trial they're attacked, so her and the prince have to like survive together. How does a book this length have everything fit into it? I don't know. I feel like there's just so much depth with fantasy books. How are you gonna get the whole story done? And again, I don't think I've seen for the other 2 books of people asking for sequels. I have seen people asking about it for this, which makes me nervous because I really don't like cliffhangers. So I did mention some caveats, and we're gonna get to the first one. I said I don't like cliffhangers, so technically some standalone books I'm nervous to read are incomplete fantasy series, fantasy duologies. I have 2 examples here. The first I want to talk about is The Iron Widow. I have been waiting. I thought the book was still coming out in April of this year. And then I learned that the book is not coming out until April of next year because the publishers didn't pay the author fair enough. And the author, they of course deserve to be paid fairly, promptly, especially with how big Iron Widow was. So I feel like once the second book is out, I am not going to stop myself from reading this. But I feel like I've been hyping myself up to read this for so long that I, again, am nervous to read it because if publishing has already been pushed back once, is it going to be pushed back again? And I don't want to live with more cliffhangers forever. I feel like I'm already living off of the cliffhanger of a few fantasy series, and I feel like my heart could not handle another one. I feel like with Fourth Wing specifically, we know the next book is coming out in November, but I also feel like, similar to The Girl with the Louding Voice, this is an extremely popular book on Book Talk, and I am intimidated to read it, 1, because I might not like it, 2, because of the cliffhanger, even though it's ending in November, and 3, just because I am nervous that I then am going to like it, and then I'm going to have to wait on a cliffhanger until November. So this isn't as bad. I might just wait for the other books, but I feel like My general intimidation is I don't like to start incomplete series. I do feel like that's a personal problem. I do feel like I need to get over that. But it is something that intimidates me when it comes to reading these like first books in series, these standalone books, especially because I do really like them. I feel like I just had that same experience with reading Zara, Guardians of the Dawn. Like, I want the other books now, but I can't have them. And part of me almost wishes I didn't read Zara until the entire series was out. So that's like my personal intimidation nerves when reading some of those like temporarily standalone books, because you know the series is coming, but the series isn't out yet. My last sort of caveat, I do now have standalone books again. However, this is now falling under the veins of standalone books I'm nervous to read because of the author. Like, I feel like people can guess at least one of the authors I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about two. You can take your little guess. So the first was some standalone books, and I know technically these two are like a series, but they follow different people. Kind of gives me those like interconnected standalone vibes. But the author is Tessa Bailey, and I have just seen very mixed opinions on Tessa Bailey. I feel like people really support her or they really don't support her. So I'm just nervous to get into her world because I really want to try to not read such problematic authors as I potentially have in the past. It's so hard for me because I took an 8-year break. Maybe I read problematic authors like 8 years ago. I don't know now though, but I don't want to start doing that. I do have 3 of her books. I did buy one of these, 2 of these were gifted. I have My Killer Vacation, I have It Happened One Summer, and I have Hook, Line, and Sinker. So again, I don't want to support problematic authors. And with Tessa Bailey, it's just kind of a bigger question mark for me. Like, I've tried to do research, but I don't fully have that understanding. I think with her like Sincerely Yours books, I think there's some issues with the representation of the main character on the cover versus, you know, how they're described in the book. I feel like I was just having a conversation with my friends about this where we were talking about how the character is deemed plus size, but they weigh like 150 pounds, which is not plus size. I don't even know if that's mid-size, to be honest with you. And again, like, I don't want to read that problematic language. So any Tessa Bailey books, her standalone books, just kind of a big question mark for me. Our final author, who I have a lot of standalone books for, and I definitely need to explain myself when I show you all of these. You probably guessed Colleen Hoover. It was Colleen Hoover. So I have these 5 books by Colleen Hoover. Reminders of Him, All Your Perfects, Layla, Verity with the hardcover and extra chapter, and November 9th. I'm gonna split these 2 piles up into her more like thriller-based genres and her more romantic-based genre. So we have Reminders of Him, All Your Perfects, and November 9th in more the romantic category. We have Layla and Verity in the thrillers. And I'm intimidated by these for different reasons, and then there's just an overall intimidation with Colleen Hoover in general. I want to start with the thrillers. Now, I am a thriller lover. However, sometimes psychological thrillers aren't my favorite. So I am intimidated to read these because honestly, I just think these books sound a little odd. And I definitely, when I joined Book Talk, these were all over my For You page. I was influenced to buy them. And I feel like one thing that I've learned is to not be so quickly influenced, especially by people I don't trust, because I don't think I would have bought these all now if I had known my mutuals that I know now. So with Layla, I don't know. His wife gets like injured in an accident and then he starts falling for this other girl. Kind of weird. Verity, the author, Verity, she is like unable to do stuff and her husband starts falling in love with the ghostwriter. So I feel like both of these still have romance, but they're supposed to have like a thriller part to it. I don't know. Definitely intimidating. I feel like I am more so intimidated to read Verity than Layla. I feel like Layla's gonna be meh, but Verity I know people have really strong feelings about, and I feel like I'm not going to go with the popular crowd's feelings on this. So with the romance books, I'm gonna be honest, I haven't really heard much about All of Your Perfects. So I feel like I'm somewhat intimidated to read this, but since people haven't talked about it, I'm guessing this isn't as good. So I feel like I could probably agree with folks' opinions on this. So of all the Colleen Hoover books, I feel like I'm least intimidated to read this. I feel like I see a lot of people talk about how good Reminders of Him and November 9th are. I don't know. And I have read some Colleen Hoover romances before and I just wasn't a fan. And I feel like now with like the movie pictures coming out for It Ends With Us, a lot of people are starting to question how good It Ends With Us was. I don't know if people would question these the same. I don't want to be attacked if I don't like these. So in general, I'm intimidated. And then an overarching umbrella for all of Colleen Hoover's books, like I feel like she is more clearly problematic in terms of some of the stuff that she's done in relation with her son. I feel like that was easier to see once I did some research, and I definitely felt like I bought these out of the hype, out of what was on my For You page, and I feel like I've learned not to do that. I am a reader that always wants to develop my own opinions on something, which recently has bit me in the butt with Holding Up the Universe, but I do still want to develop my own opinions and do my own takes. However, I don't want to promote a problematic author. So I don't know if I'm ever going to read these, if, I don't know where I draw the line with problematic authors or not, because I feel like there's a huge list of problematic authors out there somewhere that I've seen before, but you just see so many people talking about the books. You're like, what is really problematic? What is not? So I feel like with Colleen Hoover, I am definitely more intimidated to read her books just because I feel like that's not my vibe anymore. So those are my standalone books / some authors / I don't like cliffhangers. And I'm curious to see if there are any other standalone books you're intimidated to read or pick up for whatever reason. I'm really curious because sometimes when I feel this way about books, I feel kind of alone about why I'm intimidated. So I'd really like to hear if anyone else kind of feels like me. Let me know, and I will catch you in the next one.